Madam President.
The senior senator from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise today in opposition to Republican efforts to nullify the Department of Labor's rule that protects retirees and affirms decades of precedent. This rule allows those investing retirees' savings the freedom to direct those funds where the retirees want them to go. It lets them protect those funds from costly risks posed by worsening environmental disasters or unsafe and unfair working conditions, and seek out promising, sustainable, long-term investment opportunities. Republicans' latest front in their wholly made-up culture war is an attack on quote-unquote woke capitalism, and American retirees are apparently their targets. In particular, Republicans have set their sights on retirees who choose to invest their money with environmental, social, and governance, ESG, factors in mind. Now, investors have actually been doing this for decades. The Department of Labor has repeatedly said that under the Employment Retirement Income Security Act of 1974, known as ERISA, retirement plan managers may consider all relevant economic factors when making investment decisions if it's in the best interests of the plan's participants. That includes ESG factors like how a company treats its workers, or whether the company is sufficiently protected from climate risks, and whether the company respects human rights. And it turns out investors really want to know these things. You don't need to be a financial wizard to realize that whether a company invests in its workers or is vulnerable to climate risks might be relevant to the company's long-term prospects and the potential returns on your investment. But the Trump administration put blinders on investors when, in 2020, it finalized a rule limiting that and made it harder for retirees to invest with ESG considerations in mind. Now, in 2024, the Biden administration, Department of Labor, rightfully removed these roadblocks and affirmed that retirement fiduciaries have the obligation to consider ESG factors when making investments on behalf of retirees. Let's be very clear about what this rule does not do. It does not mandate anything. It does not require that fiduciaries invest or not invest in certain funds. It does not tell fiduciaries to consider or not to consider certain factors. There is nothing new here, and certainly nothing extreme. Let's be clear. By overturning the Department of Labor's rule, Republicans want to tie investors' hands and override the free market. This fight isn't about protecting and strengthening America's retirement security. It's not about ensuring that retirement plan fiduciaries are making sound financial investments. And it sure as heck is not about capitalism. It's politics, plain and simple. And how do I know that? Well, Republicans clearly believe that investment decisions should be made with consideration of ESG factors so long as they are ESG factors that the Republicans support. My colleague, Senator Rubio, has championed legislation that would prevent the federal government's employees' retirement assets from being invested in Chinese and Russian companies. At the same time, Republicans also seem to believe that government shouldn't restrict investors' ability to put their money wherever they want. So in response to the Department of Labor's very sensible guidance warning about the financial risks of investing in crypto scams, my colleague, Senator Tuberville, introduced a bill that would prohibit any guidance that would limit the type of investments that workers can make. He said, quote, "The government has no business standing in the way of retirement savers who want to make their own investment choices." So add up what the Republicans have already told us with the legislation that they are sponsoring. Retirees should have the freedom to invest their hard-earned money in crypto scams, but they should not even be allowed to consider whether a company relies on child labor or is polluting the planet or is underpaying its workers when deciding whether or not an investment is sustainable. It just doesn't make any sense, and it's not supposed to. There is a bigger picture here that Americans need to understand. Republicans know that President Biden will veto this resolution the minute it hits his desk. They know it won't succeed in nullifying the Department of Labor's rule. So what is the point of doing this? Well, Republicans have been explicit that the goal of this exercise is to help their buddies in the courts. President Trump appointed judges across the country who are now engaged in a disturbing assault on the regulatory state and are hell-bent on kneecapping any efforts to make markets fairer, to make workers safer, and to make the environment cleaner. This resolution is just one more attempt by Republicans to give an assist to these extremist judges and make it easier for the courts to overturn the rule and undermine the law. Let's call this attack on the Department of Labor's rule what it really is: a wholly invented grievance to advance corporate special interests, not the interests of retirees. Democrats need to stick together on this and reject these cynical efforts to undermine investor protection and empower extremist Republican courts. Thank you, and I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Madam President, I rise today in opposition to Republican efforts to block President Biden's student loan debt relief plan, rescind the payment pause extension, and upend the lives of millions of hardworking Americans. Now, it is no surprise that Republicans have prioritized an effort to block the president's plan to deliver critical relief to 43 million working and middle-class student loan borrowers. Republicans in Congress have shown time and time again that they would much rather deliver relief to giant corporations and protect tax cheats than help working Americans whose biggest sin is to try to get an education. I support the president's actions to help these hardworking Americans, but let's be very clear. The Republican plan goes far beyond rescinding President Biden's plan to cancel student debt. Republicans could have written their resolution to simply overturn debt cancellation, but instead, they demanded something that is much more extreme. The Republican proposal would void the student loan payment pause that was in effect from last September through last December during the pandemic. This means that if this CRA passes, it would rescind the president's plan to cancel debt for families that need it most. But it also means that everyone whose payment was paused would immediately owe 4 months of back payments plus interest. Republicans are asking Americans who benefited from a pause in payments to immediately pay back potentially thousands of dollars to Uncle Sam. Nearly 40 million Americans who are saving an average of $233 a month from the pause would be called on to cut a check to the government for months of retroactive student loan payments plus interest, all because they relied on the United States government's statement that their loan payments were paused. This extreme Republican resolution would harm millions of hardworking Americans. But there's even more. By rescinding the payment pause extension, this Republican legislation also endangers our public servants. Teachers, nurses, firefighters, service members, and others who are working toward paying down their debt program through the Public Service Loan Forgiveness, or PSLF. If you are a public servant enrolled in Public Service Loan Forgiveness, every month of the pause counts toward your total of 120 payments before your balance is forgiven. According to the Department of Education, more than 400,000 borrowers received Public Service Loan Forgiveness credit during September through December payment pause last year. This CRA would retroactively disqualify those months of credit toward PSLF, leaving teachers and nurses and firefighters further behind on their path to being debt-free. And if you're one of the 260,000 public servants around the country who received credit for your final payment since September of last year, and you finally got your student debt balance forgiven, you, under the Republican plan, would be at risk of seeing your relief clawed back and being thrown back into debt. Just to give an example to that, in Massachusetts, more than 5,500 public servants across our Commonwealth could see their loan balances restored, so they owe the money again. In Louisiana, more than 3,600 of Senator Cassidy's own constituents could see their public service loan forgiveness taken away, and they would have to now pay more money. Republicans have tried to sell this CRA as their attempt to block President Biden from canceling up to $20,000 of student debt for the working families that need it most. And they say there's nothing more here to see. But make no mistake, voting for this CRA is not just a vote against the president's student debt cancellation plan. It is also a vote to force nearly 40 million hardworking Americans to immediately pay back months of student loan payments and interest and restore an estimated $20 billion of student debt to the balances of tens of thousands of public servants. Regardless of your feelings about student debt cancellation, that is a slap in the face to middle-class families, to working families everywhere in this country. And that is why labor unions, civil rights groups, and even centrist policy organizations are fighting against the Republican CRA. And it is why I urge every one of my colleagues to join them. Thank you, Madam President. I yield. Special thank you to Senator Klobuchar for her thoughtful and passionate words about the harm that the senator from Alabama is imposing on our military and on our nation. As the senator from Minnesota said, we are here fighting to try to protect our nation, while Senator Tuberville, in the view of the former secretaries of defense of both parties, is undermining our national security. I also want to thank Senator Reid for his leadership and his steady hand in trying to persuade the senator from Alabama that it is time to end this blockade. Mr. President, this is the third time that I have come to the Senate floor to ask the senator from Alabama to reconsider his unprecedented action of blocking hundreds of promotions earned by our men and women in uniform. The Senate votes on nominees appointed by the president to occupy top roles in government: cabinet secretaries, judges, and ambassadors. The Senate's role in approving nominations also extends to thousands of military promotions every year. If a colonel does an exceptional job and their Military Services Promotion Board decides that they're ready to be a brigadier general, the Senate must hold a vote for that promotion to go through. Now, in the vast majority of circumstances, this vote is a formality. Most of these promotions are considered in big batches rather than one at a time. Most of the time, there isn't even a recorded vote. We are confident in the process and we pass these people through. They've been thoroughly vetted and their promotions are essential for our security. But now, for 5 months, the senator from Alabama has blocked all senior military nominations and promotions from moving forward without a recorded vote. That means one senator is personally standing in the way of promotions for 273 of our top-level military leaders. One senator is preventing the Marine Corps from having a commandant for the first time in 100 years. One senator is setting the Army on a similar course not to have a senior leader. One senator is blocking the confirmation of the president's top military advisor, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. One senator is holding up pay raises for hundreds of men and women in uniform. One senator is jeopardizing America's national security. The senator from Alabama has taken this dangerous step because he disagrees with the policy the Department of Defense announced after last year's abortion decision by the Supreme Court. After that decision, the department clarified that if a member of the armed services needs to travel to access abortion care or other kinds of reproductive health care that are not available where they have been stationed, for instance, because a state where they have been stationed has banned these forms of health care, then they can leave to do so. This is a common sense policy that is completely legal under the department's existing authorities as established by Congress. The senator from Alabama disagrees. I think he's wrong. But look, we all have executive branch policies that we disagree with. As I've previously pointed out, as senators, we have many tools to influence policies. We can hold hearings, we can write oversight letters, we can vote, we can pass laws. In fact, the Senate Armed Services Committee recently voted on a bill that would get rid of the policy that the senator from Alabama opposes. The proposal to get rid of the policy failed to get a majority. It was rejected. And if we held that vote among the full Senate, I believe it would fail here as well. In short, the senator from Alabama doesn't have enough support to actually pass a law to change the department's policy. So the senator from Alabama, instead of accepting what the majority has decided here, instead has decided to hold our senior military leaders and their families hostage as a protest against the fact that he doesn't have enough votes to change a perfectly legal policy that he just doesn't like. Since I was here last asking for these promotions to be approved, the situation has only become worse. The senator from Alabama's hold has left the Marine Corps without a commandant and will soon leave the Army without its most senior leader as well. If this continues through the fall, the president will be deprived of his top military advisor. The senator from Alabama is decapitating the leadership of our own military. And make no mistake, the real people being punished by these holds are the military families that had expected to make a move as part of taking up a new post in service to their country. We must address the damage this hold has inflicted on our armed forces, and we must do so by immediately approving every single one of the 272 leaders being held hostage by the senator's actions. Not pick up one or two, not 10 or 20, who the senator from Alabama decides would buy him some time. Every single person. This summer is a critical time for families moving across the country or across the world to try to find new housing, to enroll their kids in new schools, and generally to get ready for the new school year. But now, all of that is on hold because those families don't know where they're going to be in the fall. The Department of Defense has shared stories of students who are disenrolled from their current school because they thought they'd be somewhere else in September, but now they don't know if they can enroll in their new school because their parent doesn't know if they'll be able to relocate by then. Spouses who assumed they would be moving or even ended a job now don't know where they may live or work. These hundreds of nominees and their families can't wait for us to figure this out when we get back from the August recess. The senator from Alabama needs to fix this now. If the senator from Alabama refuses to lift his hold, he will be forcing families to either pull their kids out of classes in the middle of the school year or spend the year hundreds or even thousands of miles away from their loved ones. Over 500 active duty military spouses recently delivered a petition to the senator from Alabama, urging him to release his hold and to end this uncertainty for military families. They said it was, quote, highly inappropriate and unpatriotic to wage a political battle by using military service members as pawns. These active duty military spouses got it right. Spouses and families support our service members. If we treat them and their service with this level of profound disrespect, we will only be exacerbating our country's military recruiting challenges. We recently held a confirmation hearing for General C.Q. Brown, the president's nominee to be the next chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. As the senator from Alabama noted, General Brown has had to move 20 times over the course of his military career. General Brown was very clear about the consequences of the holds that the senator from Alabama has imposed. He says that, quote, we will lose talent. Our senior military leaders don't want to be a political football, but even they are starting to speak out about the impact of these holds. The Deputy Commanding General of the U.S. Army Europe Africa called these tactics, quote, reprehensible, irresponsible, and dangerous. Our civilian leaders are deeply concerned as well. In April, I sent a letter to Defense Secretary Austin asking about the impact of holding up these military promotions. Secretary Austin wrote, quote, the longer that this hold persists, the greater the risk in the U.S. military runs in every theater, every domain, and every service. General Austin went on to point out that these unprecedented and unnecessary holds are creating, quote, rising disquiet from our allies and our partners at a moment when our competitors and adversaries are watching. As I've mentioned before, there is bipartisan opposition to the senator from Alabama's actions. 7 former defense secretaries, including ones who served under President Trump and President George W. Bush, sent a letter stating that leaving senior positions, quote, in doubt at a time of enormous geopolitical uncertainty sends the wrong message to our adversaries and could weaken our deterrence. The first time I came to the floor to ask the senator from Alabama to let these promotions move forward, he was holding up 184 nominees. The second time I asked him to step aside, the number was up to 221 top-level service members. Now we have 273 leaders who have been blocked from assuming leadership positions that they have earned and that we need them to occupy in order to keep our country safe. The senator from Alabama is single-handedly holding up 10 four-star commanders, 54 3-star commanders, multiple Silver Star and Purple Heart recipients, the next Commandant of the Marine Corps, the next Chief of Staff of the Army, and the next Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. We have voted on this abortion policy. The Senate Armed Services Committee has held a briefing with the Department of Defense on this issue. We have held a briefing with the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice has issued a legal opinion that DOD is well within the law. Secretary Austin has personally called the senator from Alabama to urge him to relent. I am hopeful that the senator from Alabama will finally do the right thing and allow these service members to carry out their responsibilities to our nation. We owe this to the people who put their lives on the line for active service for our country, and to the families who serve by making these lives possible. The senator from Alabama should relent for the family, should relent for the active duty members of the military, and should relent for the security of our nation. Mr. President, I yield the floor. Mr. President, I rise today to recognize an extraordinary public servant who is leaving my office for a new role. John Donnenberg has been one of my most trusted senior advisors since 2011, when I first ran for the United States Senate. After his stint advising me on policy during the 2012 campaign, I asked John to serve as my first legislative director in my Senate office. John was my LD for 6 years, then senior advisor and policy director for Warren for President, and for the last 4 years, he has served as my chief of staff. After nearly a dozen years of working together, I have come to know John pretty well, so I can say with some authority that he is one of the best policy nerds and sharpest minds on economic policy in the business. When I arrived in the Senate, I knew more than pretty much anybody else in the world about a very specific slice of commercial law. I also had spent a lot of time thinking about how middle-class families were getting crushed by an economy that didn't work for them, and thinking through how to fix it. And this was a good start, but being a senator means doing work on a much, much broader range of issues. John was the person I turned to for counsel as I developed that broader agenda, drawing on his deep expertise with policy, his facility for digging into data, and his formidable technical training. Also, importantly, John has good values. The long-standing belief that government is here to serve not the richest and most powerful, not those who can hire armies of lobbyists and lawyers, but here to serve the people who are trying to build a future for themselves and their families. John and I were a good match, and I will say that when I'm not saying, as part of that, that we always saw our next moves the same way. But he has a lightning-quick mind, a staggering command of both domestic and foreign policy topics, and instincts honed by years of working in Congress. And those qualities allowed him to see around corners I didn't even know existed. He's good with numbers, and he's never been afraid to change his mind based on what the data show him. Our relationship has always been energetic. John hasn't been afraid to tangle with me when he thought I was getting something wrong. He would tell me I was making a mistake, and I would tell him he didn't know what he was talking about. We would size each other up, and I would start lobbing fastballs at him just like I was back in the classroom, trying to figure out if a student had done the reading and was on solid ground in their arguments. John, of course, has always done the reading. He would grab those fastballs out of the air and zing them back at me with a spin, often highlighting an aspect to the issue I had failed to consider. Sometimes I would try a new angle, play the devil's advocate to see if he could defend his position, back and forth until I had, often in the space of 10 or 15 minutes, pressure-tested an argument more thoroughly than seemed possible. Now, I'm not saying John won all those arguments, but I give him a 50-50 lifetime record, which is pretty respectable in my book. And I'd also say this, 100% of the time, my thinking about an issue got deeper and sharper as a result of running my views through the gauntlet of John's scrutiny. Given all these attributes, it should come as no surprise that John had a very specialized skill that is rarely employed among adults outside elected office. John was a whiz at debate prep. He has worked with me and several other senators during our races, helping candidates prepare for pre-election debates. He put all of us through our paces, forcing us to confront the frustration and the opportunities of butting heads with our opponents and doing it in 1-minute chunks. For all of us who managed to survive those debates far better than we expected, we owe John our thanks. When he came to work for me, John brought with him years of experience in Congress. Before joining my office, John served as chief counsel to Senator Richard Blumenthal. Before then, he served as health law advisor to Representative Henry Waxman on the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee and the House Energy and Commerce Committee. I asked Henry Waxman for a few words about John, and he had this to say, quote, "John started his congressional career as a precocious young staffer in my office working on the Affordable Care Act. He's leaving Senator Warren's staff as a veteran chief of staff with many distinguished legislative accomplishments. What's been constant is the gratitude and respect he has earned from everyone who has been lucky enough to work with him along the way." John's first experience working in Congress has a special resonance for me. John was a legal fellow for Senator Ted Kennedy, the senior senator from Massachusetts who served for 47 years in the seat I now hold. I think Senator Kennedy would be pleased to know that the young man he first brought in for work in the federal legislature ended up contributing so much to this work. There is one more aspect of John's leadership that I want to make sure to highlight. He is a dedicated mentor who has trained scores of policy staffers in how to make this country work better for families who don't always have someone in government looking out for them. Year after year, I have observed as John invests in the staff on my team and throughout government, supporting them, teaching them, and challenging them, and always, always, always making them better at what they do. Congress is a hard place to work in a lot of ways. John often tells me that trying to make change by working in the Senate can feel a lot like running face first into a brick wall over and over and over again. You have to keep standing up and sprinting back at the wall because even though history suggests you're going to smack right into it just like last time, the only way you'll ever smash through the bricks is by taking one more run at it. John is the kind of colleague who makes you want to take one more run at knocking down the wall that has never been knocked down before, the one who will help you dust yourself off and then sprint along beside you. I've watched as these staffers who John has trained have transformed from eager, gifted beginners into seasoned strategists. John and I have stood proudly side by side as we've seen them leave our office and take their talents to go make change somewhere else. John's commitment to mentorship means that today we have more dedicated public servants doing top-notch work all around the country and doing it better because of their time learning from him. Now John is the one who is taking his talents to another public service post. He is headed to the White House to serve as Deputy Director of the National Economic Council. I know John will bring with him to this position an abiding commitment to helping working families, as well as one of the best policy brains in the business. One last note. John is a good man. He is honest, He is principled, he is generous, he is funny, he cares about people. He loves his family deeply, and he is always there for his friends. He tries to live his life every day according to deeply held moral values. I admire him. So, John, I am grateful down to my toes for the years that we have worked together. I will miss having you by my side, but I know that the President, the nation, and the world will be better off because of the challenges you will help tackle in this new role. Thank you for your work, both past and present and future. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor. Mr. President.
The Senator from Massachusetts.
Mr. President, I rise today about a resolution to make it harder for students, all students, to have access to school meals. I'm referring to SJ Res 42. We deal with a lot of complex issues here every day. This is not a complex issue. First, the federal policy. The USDA memo clarifying that state agencies and programs participating in federal school meal programs are required to abide by our nation's anti-discrimination laws. This means that they cannot deny access to kids on the basis of their gender identity or sexual orientation. In other words, schools may not deny lunch to LGBTQ plus kids. Now, this isn't some strange new interpretation of the law that USDA came up with and announced out of the blue. This is the USDA implementing anti-discrimination laws that apply across government in line with the Supreme Court's reading. And this is what the Republicans attempted to overturn with SJ Res 42. Of course, SJ Res 42 was never really just about school lunches. The goal was to send a message to LGBTQ plus kids that they are not welcome, to send a message that it's okay to discriminate against these kids because of who they are. I want to be very clear. That is wrong. We proudly stand with LGBTQ plus kids. Your rights matter. You are welcome at school. The USDA guidance will help kids. It will also reduce discrimination and bring agency guidance into line with Supreme Court precedent. The USDA policy will also ensure that hungry kids get the food they need to grow and to do well in school. According to census data, LGBTQ plus individuals are almost twice as likely to live in a household that experiences food insecurity, and trans individuals are almost 3 times more likely not to have enough food to eat as compared to cisgender individuals. The last thing our kids need is adults behaving like classroom bullies and trying to justify taking away their lunches. I'm glad the Senate rejects this resolution. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.